the time of year when most of America gets some snow, if they're going to get any snow at all. And I decided to invite on the program Gregory Cohen, who is the American Highway Users Association president and CEO. Mr. Cohen, thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you, Lars. Happy to be here.
I'm glad to have you here because I think people should realize how much of a difference it makes when highway departments decide to use salt and the right kind of chemicals to keep their roads clear. Let's start with what can happen if you don't. Your association put out a report, it might have been a year or two ago, but you talked about what the effect is on a major city if the city is shut down by a snowstorm, as some big cities are that don't routinely deal with snow. What kind of economic impact can that have?
Well, it varies depending on the state. We looked at the northeastern states at the time, sort of the snow belt here on the east coast of the country. The bigger states, a full closure could cost over $500 million a day in some cases, and smaller states were, down around $100 million a day. So it can be very, very significant. Mainly the costs are, the folks that are hit hardest are the hourly workers who don't get any salary when they miss their work. But there's a direct economic impact as well as taxes and wages that are lost and sales that are lost.
And I guess at Christmas time we think about people buying presents, but you also have to think about people going out to dinner. So if you don't go out to dinner, yeah, sure, there may be diners in the restaurant later on, but you've always lost those sales that were lost on that night when the city was shut down.
Exactly right. Yeah, we looked only at the net economic impact. So for those sales that would have likely been made up, those didn't count. These are just losses, and the study we commissioned was done by IHS, which is a global firm.
All right, now let's talk about salt itself, because the country uses, about 20 million tons of salt every year?
I'm not sure. That could be.
Well, let's talk about the cost then, because people bring up cost, and I was surprised to find out there are places, including the place where I have my studios in Oregon, where they say, well, gosh, we don't like salt. It's not environmentally friendly, so we use magnesium chloride instead, and they cite cost as an issue as well. But it looks as though from your association that the difference between salt and magnesium chloride is pretty dramatic.
Oh yeah, there's nothing better than salt, and I was just reading today that Oregon is finally getting the message. I mean, every state around it uses salt; it's cheaper than everything else, and the environmental impacts, that is something that requires sensible treatment. There's best practices that exist today, and I'm pleased to see that or hear that Oregon is beginning to use salt more now.
Well, they're even talking because the city of Portland just got hit with a major snowstorm, and it caused absolute gridlock. And there were thousands of people out on the road, some of whom were out there for 5 and 6 hours, burning gas, not able to get where they were going. Some kids were trapped on a school bus for hours, couldn't get home. Some kids were trapped at school, couldn't get home. Mom and dad couldn't get to them; they couldn't get home. It was a pretty ugly situation, and I'd love to see them do this and avoid it. But it sounds as though when you cite, towns like, Rochester, New York, where they buy a lot of salt every year, but it costs about $1 million a year for them to buy the salt and another $1 million to put it on. That sounds like a pretty inexpensive solution.
It is. It's ridiculous salt is the cheapest thing you can buy. You want to do a good job of storing it to make sure that you protect your environment, and that's what costs a little bit more to do it right. But it pays for itself within the first 25 minutes in terms of economic and also, of course, safety, lives saved and injuries prevented. And, there's no economic case for the cost issue. The key, we've been actually looking at videos, not just of recent, but over the last several years of cars sliding around roads in Oregon and actually up in Seattle before they reinstituted salt. And it is not a pretty sight. It's very, very dangerous. And I frankly think it's more of a political decision not to use the salt and to use magnesium chloride. And if you want to put the safety of people first as well as your economy, I think ODOT is probably doing the right thing by reintroducing the salt on the roads.
I'm talking to Gregory Cohen, who's the president and CEO of the American Highway Users Association. The study your industry cites is within 25 minutes of being applied, you reduce crashes by 88%, injuries by 85%, and accident costs by up to 85%. That's a pretty strong argument for making use of it.
Absolutely, especially, when you consider that of the 34,000 lives we lose every year to traffic accidents, more than 1,000 of them are on snow and icy roads. You got to put the safety of people first, and there's definitely ways to also protect the environment.
All right, so talk about this, about the environment. How much of a difference is there between magnesium chloride, I remember just enough of high school chemistry to know that is a salt, and sodium chloride? Is there a giant difference in its effect on the environment or potential effect on fish and wildlife and all that?
I do not know the impact of magnesium chloride, but I will tell you that there was a time in the East where salt may have been overused. However, that practice, the best practice with regard to salt, has changed quite a bit. And at this point, used properly, and I'm sure ODOT would be, looking at this, but using the right amount, which is not too little and not too much, it has very, very minimal impact to the environment at all, to water, and to even to vehicles. You just have to use the best practices and use the right amount. And the technology available now in snow fighting equipment is far superior to what it was 10 or 20 years ago.
Well, in fact, you mentioned that the way you apply it. I understand that some people are actually mixing beet juice or other kinds of almost ag waste with salt and making a brine and spraying it. So if the highway department already has the right equipment for spraying things like magnesium chloride out, they probably have the same gear that could spray a different kind of liquid.
Yeah, absolutely. And, pre-treating these roads with a salt liquid brine is always very, very helpful before the first bits of ice and snow hit. All the equipment all the modern equipment should be capable of doing that today.
So, any other issues that we've missed on this? Because I want to make sure people understand. Because I've been beaten on the highway authorities for years, saying, "Why is it other states do it, even neighboring states do it, but you don't?" And we had accidents, we had injuries, we had economic cost, and all the rest of that for a couple of days this week. I'm not saying it's the $500 million of a bigger city, but even if it was only $100 million, that's a lot of money to peel out of people's pockets for a political decision not to use a particular way of getting rid of the snow and ice.
Well, it's probably because you've been beating the drum that things are happening, because Oregon has been all alone for a long time, and all the neighboring states have figured this out, how to do this right. And it's kind of, it's frankly a little embarrassing that for the pilot program they had, the roads got so bad when you crossed the border into Oregon that their pilot was just to use salt on the first few miles in Oregon so that it didn't look so bad when you crossed into the state.
Is that right?
That is the pilot that they have just completed. and finally, I think people said, that's ridiculous. They know that this stuff works much better than what they've been using. And I think I read a decision today that they're going to use it more. The only thing I would say that is missing here is that the spokesperson from ODOT who talked about this said, well, we're only going to use a little bit. We're not going to dump the stuff like they do on the East Coast. And frankly, he is 20 years in the past. They don't dump it on the East Coast anymore. It's like I said, there's a state-of-the-art practice. You don't use too much. You make sure you use it at the right time and the right rate. And I think my organization is a safety organization, and we think that this is going to make a significant difference in preventing injuries and saving lives, and that's really the most important thing. I
really appreciate what you do, Mr. Cohen. Thanks so very much, and I imagine the American Highway Users Association is looking forward to the new administration, because I know that the regulatory issues really hit the industry hard, and so I'm glad you took the time today.
Very excited about it, and yes, happy to be with you.
Absolutely. We'll have you.